Hello and welcome back to Family Roots. As you can see, we're somewhere different today. We're on my front porch. I'm working from home today, and you might hear some birds chirping, maybe some cars driving by, but I will try not to let the noises around me distract us too much. Anyway, so before we start off today, I just want to ask, what's our big picture question? The question is there anything that God cannot do? If you know the answer, it's that God can do all things according to his nature. And so today we are going to continue on with this story of Abraham's family. We've been learning from the book of Genesis about it, and there was Abraham, then Isaac, and Jacob, and God gave Jacob another name. He gave him the name Israel. And the family grew into a nation, and it was called the nation of Israel. And Jacob's family had about 70 people, and they all left the land of Canaan because of a famine. And they went to Egypt, and lo and behold, Joseph, one of the younger brothers of Jacob's sons, he was already in Egypt, and he became a powerful ruler. And we learned last week and the week before about the roller coaster that Joseph had to go through to get to where he was. And so as they were in Egypt, years passed, and eventually Jacob died, and then more years passed, and eventually even Joseph died. But Jacob's family grew bigger, and I want you to listen really closely to our Bible story today to see what happened. So parents, we're going to be in Exodus now. We're out of Genesis finally, we're in Exodus, and we're going to go through chapters 1 through 4, all right? After Joseph brought his family to Egypt, Joseph died. His family then stayed in Egypt, and they were known as Israelites because they came from the family of Jacob. And Jacob, his other name was Israel. And so a new Pharaoh then came to power, and he was afraid of the Israelites. The family had grown so big, the Pharaoh was worried that if they joined with any of Egypt's enemies, they could just overthrow him and they could fight against him. And so Pharaoh made the Israelites slaves. He made them all slaves, and he gave them really, really hard jobs to do. But the families just kept growing and growing. The nation just kept expanding. And so Pharaoh ordered for all of the baby boys to be killed. Anytime there's a baby that was born and it was a boy, it would be killed. And so around this time, a woman gave birth to a son, and she hid him as long as she could, and then she put him in a basket and brought him down to the Nile River and set him along the banks of the Nile River. And the baby's older sister, Miriam, she stayed nearby and she watched over the baby. And soon, Pharaoh's daughter, she went down to the river to take a bath. And while she was bathing, she saw this basket that had a crying baby, and Pharaoh's daughter felt really sorry for the baby, and she wanted him to be her son. The princess then named the baby Moses. And when Moses grew up, he saw an Egyptian man mistreating an Israelite, and he killed him. He killed him. And when Pharaoh had found out what Moses had done, he was so angry that Moses actually fled out of Egypt. And he worked as a shepherd in a place called Midian for a lot of years, many, many years. And Moses then got married and had a family, and still the Israelite people in Egypt, they were miserable, and they cried out to God, and God heard them, and he planned to help them. And so one day, Moses was walking around and he saw a bush that was burning. Suddenly, God called out from the bush and said, "Moses, Moses." And Moses replied, "Here I am." And so God told Moses to take off his sandals because the ground he was standing on was holy. It was no place for his dirty shoes. And so God said, "I have seen how my people have been treated. I've seen how my people are suffering in Egypt right now. And I want you to lead them out of Egypt." Moses wondered if the Israelites would even remember who God was. And they said, "What if they ask me what your name is? What should I tell them?" And God said, "I am who I am. If they ask you, tell them, I am has sent you." And Moses said, "What if they don't believe me?" And so God gave Moses 3 miraculous signs to prove that God had appeared to him. Moses' staff would turn into a snake, his hand would become diseased and then healed, and water from the river would turn to blood. And Moses still, even after these miraculous signs, Moses still made excuses, saying, please just send someone else. I don't want to do this. And God was angry, but he agreed to send Moses' brother Aaron with him. So Moses then went to Egypt. So in this story, we see that God saved Moses' life and called him to rescue God's people from slavery. And this calling of Moses calls us to a greater rescue and a bigger rescue. The call of Jesus to come into the world and then save all of God's people, all of the world. Jesus gave up his life to save us from being slaves to sin. So this story is pretty wild. Moses barely survived being a baby. Pharaoh ordered that all baby boys to be killed. It's crazy. And Pharaoh wanted the families of Israel to stop growing. He was afraid of them. And so Pharaoh's daughter, his own daughter, ended up raising Moses. And as Moses got older, he left Egypt because, he killed a guy and he was scared and he became a shepherd. So Pharaoh made life really, really hard for all of God's people by making them slaves and giving them really hard jobs. And God saw everything that the Israelites were going through. He saw everything that Pharaoh was making them do. And he heard their cries for help. And God called Moses to deliver his people from captivity. You see, long before Moses was born, way before Moses was born, God made that covenant with Abraham. He made that promise with Abraham. And God told Abraham that his descendants, that his family would live in a foreign land and become slaves there. And the people would be slaves for about 400 years, but God would eventually free them. And in the next few weeks, we'll see exactly how God fulfilled that promise of freeing his people from the land of Egypt. So what was the first thing that God told Moses to do when Moses came upon this burning bush? God told Moses to take off his shoes because he was standing on holy ground. The ground itself wasn't special, but it was the fact that God's presence was right there that was special and that made this place holy, and it wasn't the right place for Moses to leave his dirty shoes. And then God told Moses to go talk to Pharaoh. He told him to speak to Pharaoh and tell Pharaoh to let his people go. And Moses asked God then what his name was. Do you remember what God said it was? God said his name was I am who I am. And God's name, that means that he is in control and he will never, ever change. Moses tried to make all these excuses about why he shouldn't go, but how would you feel if you were asked to talk to one of the most scary and powerful people in the entire world? But not even Moses and not even Moses' fear could stop God's plan to lead his people to freedom. God saved Moses' life and called him to rescue God's people from slavery. The calling of Moses points us to a greater calling and a greater rescue. It points us to Jesus, who was called to not just rescue one group of people from slavery, but to rescue the entire world from sin that enslaves us all. So when Moses went to the land of Midian, he became a shepherd there, and he probably thought that his time in Egypt was over. But many years later, God then called Moses to deliver his people from captivity. So how did Moses react when God first called him to deliver his people from captivity? How did Moses react? Moses had a lot of questions and a lot of excuses as to why he wasn't the right person to do this. And Moses even asked God to send someone else. And if we look at Exodus chapter 4, verse 10, it says, "But Moses said to the Lord, 'Oh my Lord, I am not eloquent. I can't speak well, either in the past or since you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and tongue.' And the Lord said, 'Who's made man's mouth? Who makes him mute, deaf, seeing, or blind? It's me. Is it not I, the Lord? Now therefore go, and I will be your mouth, and I will speak for you.'" So what kind of people does God use for his plan? God uses ordinary people as part of his plan to show the world how extraordinary he is. God working through Moses, working through a man who had a stutter, working through a man who killed another person, would lead his people out of 400 years of slavery into a new promised land. I want to read Acts chapter 13, verse 17. It says, "The God of this people Israel chose our fathers and made the people great during their stay in the land of Egypt. And with an uplifted arm, he led them out of it." So the last question is, do you think God could use you in his plan, and in what ways? God uses us even in our weakness. God uses us even in our weakness. Moses wasn't a strong speaker. He had a stutter, but God still used him. And Moses was able to confront Pharaoh because God was with him. We can rely on God's strength to be strong even while we are weak. I want to read 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 26 and 27. And it says, "For consider your calling, brothers. Not many of you were wise according to worldly standards." Paul's saying, if there's a list, not many of you are really high up the list of who's the wisest. And not many were powerful. Not many were born into a noble birth. Not many of you were strong. Not many of you have a really powerful family. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, even things that are not, to bring to nothing things that are. Paul's writing and saying that God uses us, ordinary people, to show how big he is. Because is there anything God cannot do? No. God can do all things according to his character. And his character is a character of love, of grace, of peace, and of mercy. I love you guys. I miss you guys. I hope you're being safe. And I just really hope that the people mowing their lawns and stuff right now are not too loud. I'll see you guys next week. Bye.